When you're shopping and spending a little extra for organic produce, you might look for the certified organic seal. It means somebody somewhere put their stamp of approval on those fruits and veggies, assuring customers produce like this is pesticide-free. We wanted to know if you're getting what you pay for and who's checking.
Call 6 investigator Rafael Sanchez joins us now with a national investigation. Rafael.
Todd and Jenna, good evening. We found there is no government testing in place for organic produce, even though Congress made testing the law decades ago. That means no one is testing produce from this country or produce imported from other countries. So we did our own checking. Tonight, here are our results.
Apples, bell peppers,
Organics have grown
carrots, pears.
into a multi-billion-dollar industry.
I feel like it's a better health option.
Even with no studies to back that up,
I think they taste more fresh.
people are willing to pay 20 to 30% more for organic.
I'd rather be safe anyway and just put something that doesn't have pesticides in my body.
By definition, organic does not mean chemical-free.
Will Sumner has been a chemist for more than 35 years.
It just means that they're grown without the use of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers.
He tests produce for the government.
That doesn't mean that they're not toxic.
So is the more expensive organic food we buy safer than conventionally grown? Congress tried to ensure safety when it passed the Organic Foods Production Act of 1990. It requires the U.S. Department of Agriculture test organic produce and oversee third-party certifiers all around the world. But for 22 years now, that mandated routine testing hasn't happened. The Inspector General did this audit in 2010. That's when the USDA found out its agency had never set up any testing procedures as required by law. The Call 6 investigators, joined with 10 of our sister stations across the country, went to various stores and focused on imported organic produce. We bought a wide variety, each station buying different products. Here in Indianapolis, we bought potatoes, celery, and avocados. Each station shipped samples overnight to the same certified lab in California. In all, the lab tested 33 different types of imported organic produce for us. Our results? 12% had pesticide residues. An additional 10% had trace amounts. So where did the chemicals on the produce come from? Sumner says some farmers use chemicals when they're not supposed to. But more often, contamination comes from the soil where toxic chemicals like DDT were used decades ago. There's also cross-contamination.
There's a lot of different compounds out there, and these are all drifting in different directions.
All of our organic produce that tested positive for residues came from Mexico. Many pumpkins, yellow squash, and tomatoes had small amounts of pesticides and would be allowed for sale by the USDA.
And they can't get rid of all of that, but at least it's a lower amount.
The fresh basil had a fungicide which Sumner said wasn't legal to use on organics, and the FDA would make all retailers pull that product from shelves. In order to minimize a problem like that, the government is moving forward with a testing plan 22 years after the law passed. In the future, all third-party certifiers will have to test 5% of operating farms, both here and abroad.
How well that's implemented overseas, can USDA have the staff over there to make sure it's being run the same? That's the question.
That testing was supposed to start this year, but hasn't started yet. It's worth noting that critics of the USDA's program point to imported produce because there are no government inspectors. They rely solely, Jenna, on private companies overseas.
So, Rafael, are organics better for you?
Well, our test and the USDA showed that they have fewer pesticides in organics, and there are no studies that show that organics are more nutritious or healthier than regular conventional grown foods. That we put a lot of these studies, a link of those studies on the IndyChannel.com, and get this, simply washing your organics or your regular food with some H2O can reduce residues by 50%.
Probably cheaper, too, to just do that.
Well, you know, I'm sure it's much cheaper unless you buy those spray bottled waters. It's up to you, but H2O, as you point out, much cheaper.
All right, Rafael, thank you very much. Todd?